All right, we'll get started. Today we're gonna, as you've seen in the, I think we're gonna get a lot of folks joining in as we go. That's why I wanted to everybody in. Yep. Okay. All right. I'll keep admitting folks as they come in. Thank you for joining and welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about distributed teams. In particular, we're going to talk about the events relating to Agile and in specific, some of the techniques and practices that you can apply when it comes to distributed Agile and in using Scrum in a remote setting, right? So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Ernesto Custodio. I recently completed my PhD studies, and the research was in the area of distributed Agile teams. So we took the outcome of that, the dissertation work, the research, and applied it into a set of practices and techniques that you can use when it comes to effectively working in a distributed environment, in a distributed setting. So I want to share some of that with you. First, apologize if you've seen this. We've been doing a few prior webinars in a series, and that covers the different elements that are important when it comes to distribution. And in setting that problem statement, the first thing to recognize is that Agile is implemented through a set of frameworks. A framework is, I think of a framework as a scaffolding. A framework is a supporting structure. And that means that it lacks a lot of the details that are needed in order for us to enjoy its full aspect, right? Apologize if I sound a little distracted. I'm just admitting folks as they come in. Welcome, everyone. The frameworks that make up Agile are things like Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or others. They purposefully lack the details that you're needing in terms of applying the techniques and the practices, in this case for a distributed team. So there are 5 main areas where teams are challenged and individuals are challenged when it comes to distributed teams. They apply in the area of tools. So collaboration is difficult in a remote setting, and the tools tend to be the first line of defense for that. Of course, we come from an Agile mindset where tool takes a back seat to people and interaction and the process as well. But in this case, we do need these tools in order for us to communicate effectively. So they tend to be a central point of challenge for distributed teams. The second is the roles. How do individuals collaborate within their roles? What are their responsibilities in this new brave environment? The third, and the one we're going to talk about today, are the events, the logistics, how to facilitate it, problems that we run into in everyday aspects of the meetings. And is there a need for additional considerations in meetings that were not a part of a physical co-located team, right? And we're going to have an additional future webinar where we'll cover the artifacts, which is another main area of challenge. These are relating to things like how to visually or how to radiate the information contained in the artifacts, how to maintain the artifacts in a digital form. Many challenges around that, and we will cover that in the future. And then, of course, the techniques, the processes, the things that can improve your collaboration. We're going to talk about some of those today, but there are holistic ones also that are very important. So in the future, we'll cover that as well. I should mention, we have at Agile Genesis, We have a distributed Agile class for practitioners. So what we're going to cover here today is going to give you an introduction into the event challenges and the potential solutions, but we cover this in a lot more detail in the class, as well as, of course, the other challenge areas that are listed here. Okay. So the first thing we need to recognize is that not all distributed teams are the same. There are three major types of distributed composition. And each of them come with their own unique challenges. The first is distributed teams. That is when two or more teams are co-located. We're in our offices, but we have our team next to us, and we are collaborating with another team that is located in another area, whether that be in another country or in a different time zone or in a different state, if you're in the United States. That would be a distributed teams setup. The needs for those teams are a little bit different because you can see how the logistics of that are different than if you were a distributed members team. What is that? Well, that is if all individuals are remote, if everyone is dialed in or everyone is collaborating in a distributed manner. There's no central point of co-location. If that's the case, that is a distributed members composition. And we make that distinction because, again, the needs might be different. So part of the problem you might be facing is that you think of, oh, we're remote, we're distributed. Well, not all the problems are going to be the same. That depends on your composition. To make things a little more difficult, the one that we're more familiar with is actually the hybrid distribution. And why we tend to refer to distributed teams as this one thing? Well, it's because you've got team members that are dialed in, other team members are co-located, some are dialed in on Monday, but on Tuesday they're at the office. There's also temporal hybrid distribution. So all of these have different considerations, and you can see how it gets a little bit tricky to do this effectively. Right? Why am I highlighting this? Well, it's very relevant today because many of us have been working in a remote setting for the past year and so. And now we're being asked to come back into the office or are going into the office because we missed it and wanted to do that. But other team members aren't. So many of us are in a hybrid environment or about to go into a hybrid environment today. As it turns out, unfortunately, hybrid is actually the most difficult to implement of the three because you have to accommodate the two environments in a seamless way. So as you go into a hybrid setting, do recognize that the needs of your distributed members are going to be different than those of your co-located members, or if you have distributed team composition. That is clear in the fact that over the past year, we did this very well. We actually worked very well in distributed environments, right? And it was a surprise to many Agilists in the industry. Wow, Agile does work well distributed. A large part of that research showed had to do with this concept of equal footing. Everyone was on the same page. Everyone was remote. By the fact that we were able to experience equality across remote team members, we were able to collaborate effectively. And that, of course, had exceptions. It had a lot of challenges. We had to figure things out quickly. But the point or the key takeaway for that is that as you go back into the office where some team members are remote, some team members are not, you're going to reshuffle those cards. You're going to have new challenges because you're going into a hybrid distribution. Okay, so just by a quick show of hands, let's do a quick poll here. How many of you are being asked to go back into the office? How many of you are working remotely now? If you go to your participant panel, you can maybe raise your hand. That would be a good way for us to see that. How many of you are going in remotely today? Go ahead and signal that with your emotion there and let us know. and we'll get a quick poll. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, many of us are being asked to come in, and different organizations are approaching it differently. So we're going to be facing this situation as we continue. Right? Okay, so when it comes to the events, there are different challenges and solutions, as I mentioned. And I also mentioned that the research that I had conducted was for the doctoral contribution to the body of knowledge, and it looked like this. It's very lengthy. It's got a lot of content in it. The good news is we've distilled this for you, so no need to read into all of the academic material. A summary of the challenges looks a little like this, or looks like this, I should say. The primary challenge areas include coordination, lack of engagement, and difficulty in facilitating for teams. Right? How many of you can relate to this? How about we go to the, let's go to chat, and let's see. How many of you are having difficult coordinating or getting lack of engagement from your team members? If you were to pick one, which one would that be most pronounced for you? Yeah, I'm seeing engagement is one of them. So low engagement. Amy, thank you for that. Lack of engagement. Yeah. Coordination and communication. Thank you, Joelle. Yeah, engagement was a surprise to many of us as we went into the COVID quarantine, and how we needed to be more physically oriented in order to maintain that engagement. Well, turns out there are practices and techniques that can help us with some of those. So let's look at a few of these. Again, we're gonna give you a general introduction. We go into each of these in detail during the class, but I want to share the gamut on the solutions that are available when it comes to coordination, right? Many other teams have difficulty arranging a single schedule, for example. By the way, there was a comment on audio in chat. I just want to check that audio is good. If audio is good, give me a yes. You can hear me clearly on chat. Can you hear me clearly? Just want to make sure. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Brian. Excellent. Awesome. So if you're having difficulties when it comes to your scheduling, well, the answer to that is everyone's going to take a little hit on it, right? We're going to have to have that equal footing, or that ability to essentially have what I call remote equality, the mindset that we need to have remote equality for remote to work. The idea that, hey, we're located in Seattle, and therefore everybody and everything is going to happen around Seattle time. It's not something that's going to work if I'm on the East Coast or if I am in India, for example. So we need to pick some time zones that are cross time zone friendly, something where I do a little early time, you do a little late time. We're going to see a little bit more on that, right? Scheduling the events on cadence is key. We found that as events change to accommodate different schedules or different things that might arise, it became a significant barrier to teams to be able to do this on a regular basis. So what does cadence mean in this case? It means schedule your events way in advance and do as many of them as you can, right? Knowing that we're going to meet on Wednesday at X hour in 3 weeks from now, it's a way for us to continue to meet on a regular basis instead of you sending out that invite at different times on different times of the week or different days of the week, right? A scrum of Scrum per time region is a very, very handy tool at your disposal. It's an event that we tend to treat In Scrum at Scale, we treat it as a team, as a team of teams. And the Scale Daily Scrum, when I say the Scrum at Scale, I'm referring to the Scrum at Scale framework. The Scale Daily Scrum is that daily meeting where those Scrum and Scrum teams meet. So if that meeting is happening at a regional level where you're able to group individuals and then have representatives that are a member of the Scrum and Scrum attend in other time zones, you're going to see how that is a very, very good way to manage the cross time zone problem, right? Consolidating events. We saw a lot of teams doing some event consolidation that allow them to make the most use of the time, of course, where it made sense. And having a very, very distinct delineation of when one event started and when another one ended was a key element of success. If you mix them up, if you have your sprint review and your perhaps your retrospective back to back, make sure that, hey, we are ending the sprint review. Those that have been invited into the retrospective, please stay on the bridge. Those that are not, please feel free to drop off. That way you're keeping your audience in a very segmented form, and you're not stepping on any boundaries between the two, but you're consolidating the times when those events are happening, right? Time box agendas are a key tool here as well. When you send out your agenda, try to include some times in terms of when you're going to be covering what, and that allows you to leverage it into the actual setting. And then put a clock up where you're time boxing your actual event, right? That clock is your friend. You're going to be sharing it via desktop sharing. There are different techniques for doing this. One of them is by doing it simply off of your desktop right now. I can simply pop one up, or you can do it using a third-party application. I use Miro a lot for the visual radiation, and it has a clock and a timer. Just one quick tip there. No royalties from Miro, I promise you, just a handy tool that I think works very well in this setting, right? And the last one out of the full set that we wanted to highlight was the recording of the meetings. It is very handy. We tend to shy away from that. Yeah. Okay. I think we had a little background noise. We tend to shy away from that meeting recording. It's okay as long as it's in the working agreement of the teams. I don't recommend that you record the retros. They become, if you're having retrospectives recorded, they become very shallow. The team needs to feel that they're in a safe place to express how they work together and what they can do to improve. Other than that, if you are able to record your meetings, go ahead and you can share those, whether it be by Confluence, whether it be by links that are maintained in whatever you use to record it, all doable. Getting into that habit creates inclusion for remote team members, because if you're in a conference and that particular individual is not able to attend because of the time zone difference, you can always record and share. Don't use that as an excuse to always leave those individuals out. However, this is a practice to essentially append or add to that availability. Okay. Any on these? How about which one of these do you use the most? Which one of these have worked for you in the past? Anybody care to share by chat? Yeah, we're being shy today. That's okay. Yeah, okay, we got some folks. Yeah. Schedule event on cadence. Yes. So thank you, Brian. That is one that's a low-hanging fruit. It's so easy to do. In fact, it makes our lives a lot easier because we don't have to worry about continuing to remember to send out that new schedule. Just keeping it on the same time zone, time and date is key, and it increases attendance and engagement. 1, 2, and 5. That is one is choose cross time zone friendly hours. So keeping that Keeping that equality when it comes to other time zones is very critical. Scheduling the time on cadence, there it is again. And then consolidating the events, one technique that showed to be very effective for maximizing the time. Yeah, excellent. All right. Moving into the engagement, many of you mentioned that one of the challenges you were having, or one of the primary challenges, was around engagement. The engagement problems, or the subcategories there, were essentially a lot of distractions, right? This had to do with people having many different environments that they were working or are working from, whether it's the dog barking, whether it's someone at the door, or it's simply the fact that it's noisy in the background, and we got 30 things going on at once, right? The idea that I'm just simply exhausted because we're attending at 2 a.m. my time, right? It's another one. So just having that lack of engagement because it's just not possible for me to follow. And then low attendance was another one, right? How many of you are experiencing lack of attendance in some of your events? The idea that individuals might just not be showing up, right? And that's on us. I tend to get asked that question a lot. And that I put on the facilitator, right? It's on us to keep individuals engaged, to keep them interested, to keep them not feeling like they're forced into sitting, but rather that they're getting value out of this. What does this for us? How do we do that? Okay, well, there are a couple of tips here in terms of practices. Video sharing. This by now should feel second nature as far as an advice, right? We've heard it over and over and over. We've got some numbers here that I think you're going to like that show the effectiveness of video sharing. It does wonders for engagement, right? People aren't comfortable as they are working from home, hence low engagement, and we have to rely just on one word and tone. Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. That is very true. This is not something that we want to force. This is something that we want to encourage. So when it comes to video sharing, I set up a safe place. Look, I'm going to share my video, and it tends to be a do as I do. A lot of people mirror that. You'll find that if I turn my video off, you're less inclined to share video because now you hear a voice, so we're going radio. If I turn it on, it brings up that that reflex for you to be encouraged to share video, but also being verbal about it. Being verbal is a key element. I like to set the stage by talking about what got me interested in a lot of this from the beginning. And that was that, look, we were all traveling very far distances to be together in a room. These are very smart people. It costs a lot of money to do this. Why do we do it? It's painful, but yet we do it because it works better. And it works better because of the concept of presence. The idea that because I went through all of that effort and now I'm sitting in a room with someone, I'm going to give that person my undivided attention. I'm going to turn off my phone. I'm going to not check my emails. I'm going to essentially provide physical cues. All of that is something that can translate into a physical environment if we are agreeing to do so. In other words, hey, let's focus on each other so that we can get the most out of this. And being verbal and getting an agreement sometimes is a good way to go about that, right? Keeping a permanent Zoom room is actually a very good technique that works well for the engagement aspect, for getting teams to connect with other team members. I've had this in several projects with different clients. And it's shown very good success rate where individuals begin to use that room as a way of just casually dropping in and just being at the keyboard while they're working. Sometimes they were quiet, but knowing that there was someone on the other side and sharing video perhaps, and they could just talk to each other in a casual setting as they continue to work. It brought that that connection that was missing back into the team. So keeping a permanent Zoom room, a social room, a water cooler room, you may call it different things. It's a very good technique for you to get your teams to connect in a remote setting, right? Screen sharing, if you're not sharing a visual cue that everyone is focused around, you're giving up a good opportunity for everyone to huddle around a particular common view, right? So always, always, always sharing your artifacts. That way you have that element that you're referring to, which increases understanding, and it actually reduces fatigue. If I have to interpret everything you're saying by maybe just hearing you or reading your body language, it's a lot more difficult than if you're telling me what to focus on by having a visual cue, which in every event, there's a common artifact that should be shared, right? And sending to that node, right? Having a larger understanding increases engagement. Send information ahead that includes, if you're going to be showing a particular set of features that are in an increment, or sending your sprint goal ahead of time in terms of what you accomplished and what you're going to be showing in the case of a sprint review. Share ahead. Give me the opportunity to prepare. And when I come to the meeting, now we can have richer discussion. And I can follow along better because I already got a pre-understanding of what we're going to cover. I don't need to be an expert. There's no expectation when I walk into the room that is different than if we were in a physical setting, but give me the opportunity to prepare. So you do that by sending information ahead, right? And the team working agreement that we had, how many of you have team working agreements today? Just say yes if you have a team working agreement. Okay, thank you, Brian. So, yeah, some of you are having those. Excellent. How many of you have revised your team working agreement in the last 6 months? Feel free, you can add a yes if you have. Yeah, many times. Excellent. Excellent, Joel. Very good. Well done. The needs of the teams are different in a remote setting than they were in a co-located environment. And if you are going to be working remotely, you need to get a new agreement from the team in terms of the elements that are important for them in that environment, right? What do we do about perhaps updating the artifacts? What are the expectations around that? Is it in real time? Are we doing it by the end of the day? How are we expected to work together? Adding clarity to those elements in a way that reconfirm what I assumed or adds new information to the working agreement is essential to making this work for everybody. So revising your team working agreement, if you haven't done so, go ahead. If you don't have a working agreement today with your team, it's an essential tool for the team to work effectively. So try to schedule that in the upcoming days. Okay? The facilitation challenges relate to things such as language barrier, cultural challenges in that same subcategory, having conflicts that are difficult to address because we're not as communicative as we were in the past, and brainstorming in a remote setting tends to be difficult if we don't have the right tools to do that, right? So it tends to be that we can do remote work effectively if we already are doing our everyday stuff that we did before. But if we have to come up with new ideas and we have to do some ideation, it becomes more difficult unless we have the right element to support that. Right. So be sure to record and share events, except for retro, saying that again, that's the one item that repeats here. Because if you are having something such as a language barrier, that is a very powerful tool for you to increase the understanding of the team members, right? So recording and sharing allows team members to go over that one more time and get a clearer understanding if they missed that. right? Cultural awareness training becomes more critical than before in a distributed environment. Why? Because we're more likely to introduce other cultures into the team as we begin to make this the way we work. That also includes the fact that because we're not going into the office, our national culture tends to take over our corporate culture. When we're in the office, we tend to mirror the corporate culture, and we assimilate to that which becomes our team, our tribe culture. When we are remote, we default back to our natural culture, and that tends to be our national culture. I'm from the Dominican Republic, Latin American, and our culture is different than the American culture. And if you're from another and working in another country where you are embedded in that culture, that is that much more pronounced. So it's very important that your team members are in tune to each other in terms of what are the cultural acumen, what are some of the elements that relate to how they can work together in being able to work together. There's plenty of training around cultural awareness. We do some in the distributed agile class as well, but if you take that out and you place it as a cultural training for the teams to get familiar with each other's culture, that will go a long way. Okay, time box the discussions and the timer, very, very key. Your clock is your friend. One of the areas that we heard over and over and over is the fact that individuals tend to be windy as far as describing that they are taking up a lot of time, so the events become a lot longer. If you want to reduce your attendance into your daily scrum or your stand-up, a good way to do that is to hold a 1 hour daily. Your attendance is just going to start shrinking significantly, right? You need to keep your events time boxed. Don't drag them out too much. In fact, try to keep them as short as possible, and you're going to get that repeated attendance and engagement. How do you do that? Well, you time box, and you time box the discussion within the events. You go ahead and start a clock, and you share it, and it's part of your working agreement that we will observe the time box clock, right? And last is the whiteboarding tools. One of the second advantage, other than that equal footing that I mentioned, that we all needed to make this work, so we're all on the same footing. The other advantage that we got out of that period of quarantining was the advancement of tool adoption. Tool adoption increased significantly over the year and a half. Many of us had physical boards. Now, just about everyone is using some form of digital backlog and boarding, whether it's in Jira, whether it's in Rally, whether it's in Azure DevOps. The other is the evolution of the tools. I saw tools like Mural and Miro, two separate tools, not to be confused. They do very similar things and have very similar names. Go from being these rudimentary type of tools to being very, very advanced platforms for collaborating online. So if you haven't used Miro, give it a shot. It's actually very useful, and Mural as well, both highly recommended. I stick with Miro because it feels a little more intuitive to me. Those tools are whiteboarding, real-time collaboration tools that allow you to do many of the ideation parts that are missing from this remote environment, right? So where you can go ahead and collaborate in a very large setting, infinite boarding with real-time elements, okay? So if you're not using whiteboard collaboration tools, give it a try. You would I think it will be very beneficial. When we talk about remote collaboration, it's important to understand that there are different stages that individuals go through. And sometimes these stages are reset depending on who we're working with. As a team, if we keep our teams, long-lived teams, they'll go through these stages and then will be effective. Why am I showing these? Because sometimes it's going to feel like this is not working. Sometimes it's going to feel like we're not making progress here. right? And the way to read this is from the bottom up, right? So teams, they start out very optimistically. Yeah, let's try this. We're gonna do this on a Zoom call, right? And then, hey, let me grab my laptop here and lock myself in a bathroom so that no one at home can you can't hear any background noise. Well, that's temporary, right? That's just a quick way for me to have a meeting, but we need to make this more permanent. Then we start to get into setting up our environment. And as we do that, we begin to experience some of those factors that default us back to the way we used to do remote, and that's the protest stage where, look, can we just kind of have audio today? I'm not going to share video. My place is a mess, and that's understandable, right? Don't get me wrong. I am not by any means saying force individuals to share video. It's an example, but you do get that protest, those individuals that begin to negotiate into the third stage, arbitration, and that is, we don't need to meet. How about we send each other emails, right? It's a form of aversion. How about we just do this over Slack, and we don't need to get in a Zoom. We don't need to have real-time discussions, right? And then because we begin to embrace those default behaviors, we go into the depression state. Now we're feeling disengaged. Now we're feeling like this isn't working. What's the point? Why are we even having events anymore if I'm not getting anything out of it? And then we realize that we need to do this right. So we begin to put the effort into making it work, and we get into the acceptance stage where it finally works, right? So do know, if you're in any leadership role and you're encouraging your teams to make it all the way through and become more effective collaborator, that there are stages that they're going to go through. As we introduce new team members, or as one team member works with another team member, they tend to reset sometimes if they're not long-lived teams, which is something that we want in a distributed remote environment. Okay. I promised you some numbers when it came to video sharing. This is one study that showed how the amount of focus, any one of these lines is color coded here to show you the increase over a period of time. These are actual sprints, iterations as the teams went after sharing video, and look at how much they've increased. In fact, the one thing that decreased was stress when it came to learning the technology. Right. So if you stick with it, it does wonders for your team. And the numbers look a little like this. I highlighted a few here. There's a lot of data here, but you look at the ones that we tend to be most challenged by. Communication, the baseline for communication went through the roof as teams began to to share video on a constant basis, right? Look at the learning and how teams were able to simply learn more by the fact that they were able to see someone on the other end. And one of my favorites down here is this trust one, and how trust increased. Just by seeing someone on the screen, you're automatically more inclined to trust that individual. And the number is more than an X factor number in there. So sharing video works. It's not always going to be the case. It should not be mandatory. It should not feel like a chore. But when individuals and teams begin to see these benefits, it is something that we encourage and want to do more of. Right. So I tend to position it as a hey, this is something that will benefit us all. Let's try to do it. If you have distractions in the background, feel free to stop sharing video. Same with muting. Feel free to mute if you're in a noisy environment. Completely understood. But if you can, let's all share video, and let's all interact via audio. So that we are present. One technique is, I know that you're with me, I know that you're in the room when you turn on your video and I am able to see you, right? Now, I'm not going to do this to you now because we're in a meetup and I understand that we don't have a working agreement. So I'm not going to call you out in that manner. But if we were in a team, I would open our session encouraging individuals, if possible, if they can, to share video, and also acknowledging that it's okay if they can't. And usually they tend to reciprocate and share, right? So we have some comments here that I think are very good as well. Let's see. Joel, totally agree with the cultural awareness. Yes, thank you for supporting that. Diversity, inclusion, and community tend to be very important. Very good. Yes, whiteboarding, collaborating by sharing those particular tools that are already holding your artifacts are a key element. Azure for DevOps added a Scrum at scale module that works nicely. Awesome, excellent. So yes, that's a great point. Thank you. Your digital tools now have almost infinite amount of plugins. Some of it may work as well, some of it may not. Sharing those plugins with other team members and across the organization tends to be a good way to also encourage that to happen, right? So if you're in a large organization, having a confluence when it comes to some of the tools and the plugins that go with those to give individuals the ability to be more effective is a nice way to continue to embrace the digital aspect of it, right? Lily, everyone sharing videos of themselves becomes problematic when the system is stressed and voice video starts breaking up, especially when meeting with team members in different countries. Yes, so I often resort to audio and only one person sharing their screen. Everyone specially shares their video when we have a social hour. Totally agree, totally understand. In fact, I wrote a blog entry, the new corner office bandwidth, right? I'm old enough, these gray hairs aren't painted in, to have lived through the age of who gets the corner office, because that was a matter of status. So it's just a little play on how we used to covet our office space, and now the new office space is really how much bandwidth we have. How much of that is a smooth transition. I often get in meetings where people are comparing how much bandwidth. Oh, I have a gig, I have half a gig. Oh, I only have 300. It's funny and it's interesting to me, but you do need to make sure that your team members have the proper bandwidth. In some places, there's just not the right infrastructure for that to happen. If that's the case, you should evaluate the bandwidth consumption of your tools. For example, I don't have it here. When we go into details into the tools in the class, we have a bandwidth comparison of the different tools. You can actually Google and get some tables. Teams, Microsoft Teams tends to be the least video or the least bandwidth consumer of the four, right? When it comes to whether you're using Zoom, whether you're using Teams, whether you're using Google, Teams tends to be less demanding on the bandwidth. So if you're having some bandwidth problems, give Teams a try. Test it. If you're already using it and it's still not working out, maybe there are other things you can try. But if you are using other tools and your bandwidth is an issue, Teams might be able to help with that. On the other hand, Teams tends to be a little more process intensive. So you got to make sure that the person has a pretty good laptop on the other side. So it's a combination. Okay. When it comes to events, we've been talking about the different events, but I also mentioned at the beginning that there are some potential new considerations, right? So the fact that your teams are in need of collaborating with each other on a daily basis is very clear now, right? That you start to get that disengagement. So having the teams work across each other is a very a very important part, as well as feeling a part of a larger community, not just one isolated team. So the Scale Daily Scrum is this one event that mirrors the stand-up. It's essentially the Scrum of Scrums, right? But in a Scrum at Scale framework, the idea that the Scrum of Scrums is a team, well, we need to give the event where that team meets on a daily basis a different name, and that is the Scale Daily Scrum, right? So I called it out as such here to make sure. If you're practicing SAFe, for example, the Scrum of Scrum is an event where you sync up, and I would highly encourage that you bring that to a daily session so that you have intra-communication between the teams for your daily stand-up, and then you go into inter-communication, meaning cross-team communication with your daily Scrum of Scrum event. Right? It's very important that the teams are able to communicate on a daily basis. Remote social time. Someone mentioned it here, and thank you for commenting on that, right? You do have social events. They became very popular, right? The Zoom happy hour. Make sure that you are continuing that and that you're being very deliberate around planning those particular events, that they're not just, hey, let me open up a Zoom and does anybody have anything they want to share? Be deliberate. The way I like to position this is, look, if I was having people over at my house, if I was having a party, I'm going to plan some things ahead. Right, I'm gonna probably get some board games out or pick out the music that I'm gonna play. I'm gonna clean up the place maybe a little bit, not all the way, maybe a little bit. I'm gonna plan so that everyone has a good time. Right, it's a very similar thing when it comes to the rest. Make sure that for your remote social time, you're being deliberate about those activities that are going to drive engagement, that are going to drive icebreakers to get people to socialize and so on, right? Product backlog refinement. I have it here with event in parentheses. Why? Because in Scrum, product backlog refinement is not an event. It's an activity that is expected to happen on an ongoing basis. That's still the case. You're expected to do refinement on an ongoing basis, non-stop, but it helps to have a cadence around particular milestones when you're meeting with the rest of the team to do some additional refinement. So I highly, highly recommend a combination of a meeting or an event for refinement and reserving some additional time for ad hoc collaboration with the rest of the teams and the product owner, right? So try ensuring that you have that cadence, allocated, structured time where you have access to the rest of the team for refinement is something that is shown to be very successful. Big room planning. I put in parentheses there, PI planning for those of you that are familiar or implementing SAFe. Very, very effective. In SAFe, we do this every quarter. That is something that in a remote setting, we might want to move into closer periods of time, maybe monthly. If you're practicing Scrum Scale, you might want to do that in a closer amount of time, or if you're practicing less or something else. But the idea that big room planning has shown to be very effective for remote teams, for us to sync up around how we're going to work together has been very valuable, right? And the PO sync up, I put this, I use the SAFe term here. It is one of the events in SAFe that is expected to happen either weekly or bi-weekly. It is in Scrum at Scale as well, where we have the meta Scrum, that is where the individual product owners are getting together and forming as a team and syncing on an ongoing basis. This is important that it happens in a distributed environment as well. Why? Because the dependencies become even that much more critical to identify ahead. If we're finding them while we're working, it's a lot more difficult, number one, to know that that's what affected the team, and two, how do we react to that when we have the team in a remote setting? We can't call everybody into the room. We have to schedule those things, and it becomes more difficult. So PO sync-ups reduce dependencies and problems that we find along the way around that. So having regular PO sync-ups becomes a useful tool for you. And the executive sync-ups. The executives need to be along for the ride. In fact, they are a part of how we do this effectively. Executives need to understand the alignment and the prioritization, and also they need to help us with impediment removers that we could not address at the team level. So having those tools added in a way that involves the executive, and it also is something that we methodically use to remove impediment at the organization level, becomes a critical component. Right. Joel says, I noticed that depending on the organization, they change the event name to make them look more casual, because the official names have more work for me type of cognition. Yeah, that is a very, very good point. Yes, the names, and look, you're free to use the names that are most appropriate in your internal corporate culture. That's okay. Just be careful sometimes, because changing a name sometimes implies a particular expectation. For example, a PM is expected to do something different than a PO, and if you call your POs PMs, you're now mixing terms that can start to add role confusion. So just be careful around that. And when it comes to the actual events themselves, in a very similar manner, right? So what you call the events, in some cases, may influence how the event is carried out, right? So good point on that, Joel. These are meant to be showing you the additional type of events that you can add in terms. That's why there's a plus there, right? Most common additional events that we find in effective distributed environments. Okay. All right, so with that, I want to just offer you a quick summary here. We get in the class into many of the aspects, showing you how the Scrum of Scrums can help in regional, how to set that up in a way that address your particular needs. We also go into PI planning and how you can do that effectively remote if you're doing safe, among many other specific techniques. But overall, just want to kind of summarize what we covered here, right? The coordination part, you have some elements at your disposal here, right? Cross time zones. I'm not going to read all of these verbatim. You have for the engagement challenges, sharing video. I would love to give you something a little more exciting that you haven't heard before, but trust me, this one takes you a very long way. Keeping a permanent Zoom room open, try that, try to build a culture around that, where the teams are collaborating on a casual basis. Screen sharing, being very methodical about that. And then you have the revision of the working agreement, which I touched on earlier before. And then on the facilitation part, recording your events, getting the teams to get used to that and feeling comfortable with the recording in the background. So that you can increase the understanding, especially of the language barriers. Holding cultural awareness training, if you do that formally or if you do that on an ongoing basis through additional resources, I highly, highly encourage that. And be sure to time box your events and stick with those so that you can continue to expect high attendance and high engagements, right? And if you're not using a whiteboarding collaboration tool, try to look into those two alternatives, such as Miro or Mural or others that might be available to you. But having one has become a very useful tool to many. So with that, I want to keep the time box. So Thank you. We do have a distributed class coming in June 25th. If you want to dive deeper into the other elements and into the topic that we covered today, there is a discount code. You can type in Meetup in the registration. If you go to agilegenesis.com, you can go ahead and check out our schedule, and in there you'll find the distributed Agile class. You also can use the same discount code for any of our classes for the next 30 days in the area of certified practitioner for Scrum at Scale distributed, and we also have Scrum and product owner classes coming up. Some of them are starting to sell out already, so if you're interested in attending in the next month or so, I recommend that you go ahead and register, and you can also benefit from that discount code, which is the Meetup code. Okay, so with that, thank you, everyone. We have a continuing series around distributed Agile, so we'll have our next one next month. I hope to see you then. Be well. Bye-bye.